Hey everyone, if you are new to my channel, I am primarily a flesh and blood content creator. So if you're interested in a bunch of Star Wars content, I don't know how much I'll be able to help you out, honestly. And if you're a viewer of mine, obviously for Flesh and Blood, and you're wondering why I'm making a deck tech and why I've been grinding locals less than a week before we have the Pro Tour in LA, I don't have an answer for you. I'm kind of trolling. I'm kind of ruining my tournament equity right now. But Star Wars Unlimited has been very fun, and I've really enjoyed this deck. But we're going to quickly cover this IDEN list today. I've only been to 2 locals, but both of these tournaments I was able to 3-0. Going to another one tonight, so the streak potentially ends. We'll see. But it's a pretty interesting deck. There's a lot of decision making. I find it to be very interactive. Some other people may find it boring, so it's all based on what you like. But the main purpose of this deck is hard board control into late game units and using IDEN usually every single turn to gain back 1, right? I've noticed like getting 1 value out of the leaders for no resources is pretty rare in this game. There's some that actually have pretty good value. Like if you look at for instance, a control deck with Darth Vader, you pay 1, but you get 2 value because you ping something and also damage the base. But IDEN just tapping for 0 to gain 1 back is pretty strong. Also lets you live long enough to, curve out, play these late game bombs or to slowly manage your board state. Her flip on 6 resources is also pretty interesting. It's a pretty clean 2-for-1 because you're able to attack a unit with the shield, take it out, and then either they have to destroy your leader or you get to attack another unit. So at the very least, you're doing a 2-for-1 as long as they don't have an immediate removal spell through the shield, and you're healing back every single time you defeat a unit. So if you can combine this with a board state where you swing out, wipe all their stuff, a board wipe, things like that, you can gain a lot of health off of this. Basically, this leader flip just lets you manage that mid game a little bit as you go into your end game state, which is important for a control deck. And Tarkin Town is pretty awesome actually. So you have 2 options for your red base, right? You could run the 30 health base with no text, or you can run Tarkin Town, which lets you 1 time per game deal 3 damage to a damaged non-leader unit. Now that seems kind of conditional and a little bit hard to get. I actually don't think it is. I think it's pretty easy to activate this whenever you want, even as early as turn 2. And what I've noticed is that I'm trying to line this up in a way where I get more than 5 value back for the deficit of 5 that I'm picking this base, right? If I take out a unit that I know is probably going to get 2 swings into me, maybe for 3 or something like that, before I'm able to actually remove it, and maybe it has some other effect that I care about, right? Then in that sense, I've gained 6 value back on the Tarkin Town, which in my opinion, just makes it better, right? So I'm kind of looking to leverage it in a way that I'm getting that 5 back and hopefully more, right? The goal is always to get more than 5 value back from it. There's a lot of different circumstances. I've noticed with this game, there's a lot of interesting decisions. There's times where I've just pinged something immediately on turn 2, just because I didn't have an immediate answer for it, even though I overkill it by a lot, right? I deal 2 to a 3 health unit and then I kill it. But there's also sometimes where I want to line it up for exact amounts, right? So I want the most value, right? So they play something with 7 health and I want exactly open fire in Tarkin Town. Or they have a 5 health unit and I want to swing 3 into it, if you're playing against Boba Fett, doing 3 into the Boba Fett unit and then Tarkin Towning it. It's a little overkill. You're kind of missing that threshold by 1, but who cares, right? So there's games where I really want to min-max that 3 damage, but there's some where I just pull the trigger immediately. I think the game is really interesting. There's a lot of decisions. I haven't figured out exactly a heuristic of when it's always appropriate to do it. I am kind of keeping that in mind. That's I want 5 back at least from it, is how I view it. I want at least something I can kind of quantify towards preventing 5. So we'll just go top to bottom. We start with our ground units. I really am valuing 3 attack early game units, right? A lot of turn 1 plays, especially in aggro decks and mid-range decks, are going to range anywhere between 2, but honestly towards 3 health, especially for ground units. I view these as a lightning bolt, right? I played on turn 1, my opponent plays something, I take initiative on my turn, I kill their unit. I haven't played enough yet into control decks to know if I want these kinds of cards into control. Part of the reason why is because an old saying in card games is that there are no such thing as bad threats, there's only bad answers, right? So a 1/1 eventually will kill my opponent, right? If they never draw a way to remove it. So potentially just having a 3-power unit on turn 1 into a control deck that maybe, presents a threat itself, right? If I'm chipping 3 every single turn, eventually they have to use an entire card to remove it, which, is a win for me. But I haven't played the control mirrors enough to know if we're doing that or if we're just cutting these and just running big haymakers, right? My inclination is that I probably do want some early game aggressive units just to put some pressure and demands some kind of answer from my opponent. But regardless, something like this is like universally like pretty good. We have Snowtrooper Lieutenant as a 2-of because you really want another unit to be on the field when you play this, but this can be really good, right? This lets you answer leaders pretty cleanly. Like they'll flip a leader, you get to give +2 to something that's ready, swing into their leader. Sometimes that's enough to take it out. So it's really good as a response to something, right? Like if you IDEN flip, they activate their leader and it's like 6 or less health, or they have like something around that threshold that you want to take out immediately. You can just Snowtrooper it in, clear it with the IDEN. You can even do it on turn 2, right? Like if they play like Boba Fett, something like that, or if they flip their Sabine leader and you need 5, right? Like you can just get it off like the Snowtrooper, right? Which is pretty sweet. It's only as a 2-of because the stat line isn't good and you need something else on the board immediately for it to work, but it's good when you have the opportunity. Viper Droid, just another 3 attack, turn 1 play. This one obviously is a pretty good ETB, but honestly, like knowing your opponent's hand in this game is not super relevant. It sounds weird, but you draw 2 a turn and you can banish anything as a resource, right? So the problem is that like hand information goes like south very quickly. You may know like a late game threat they may have, but the thing is they may just resource the card anyway. So you don't actually really know exactly, at the very least you may know what their next turn play would be, but it's too difficult. Right? It's the reason why I'm also not running Regional Governor. You just draw too many cards in this game that you can just kind of play past effects like that like kind of work on like hand information or deck knowledge. It's kind of tough because you really can just like skirt past that. So it's still good, right? We still want like the 3-2 stat line. Let's just, bolt things on the board turn 2, but hand information only goes so far when you draw 2 a turn, and you can put anything down as a resource. Wolf is here for the same reason, right? We want our 3 powers. This just lets us clear anything with 3 health, which most aggro decks and mid-range decks have the option to play on turn 1. So this just lets us answer it immediately on turn 2. When you play Wolf on turn 1, you're not healing anyway, so the ETB effect doesn't matter. Saboteur is just a good keyword to have, right? Cell Block Guard, Sentinel, I would probably put is like the 2nd strongest keyword behind Ambush. Obviously really good into aggro decks. We have Death Trooper. This, just lets you ping something off the table. Also combos really well with Tarkin Town, right? So you can take out something for 5 with just 1 card and you're still left behind with a 3/1, which also lets you clear another thing. So pretty easy 2-for-1 a lot of the times. Gideon Hosk is pretty mid. I don't like this card very much. It feels okay until like grinding matchups, but in most decks, I actually usually resource this. The main problem is it's just too clunky, right? You are a control deck. If you were more aggressive and like you had a better, like set of ground units that you could, control with, I think it'd be okay. But the problem is normally, on 5 resources, I normally want to like play a kill spell that destroys, my opponent's board. But obviously in the grinding match, it's good. The thing is that the card pool is kind of small because it's still set 1. So like you just don't have options besides it. However, if Gideon does stick, if you're in a position where you have the life total and your opponent doesn't have an immediately like panic control kind of like board state you need to deal with, Gideon House combos really well with IDEN, putting experience counters on her while she still has her shield. Works really well. We have Count Dooku and Emperor Palpatine as our top end units. These are really easy 2-for-1s. Palpatine can, I don't know, it can get really crazy, right? Like probably going to be like a 3-for-1. Sometimes it could be more. Sometimes you just kill one thing, but that's still really good, right? The option of getting to choose where you're putting the 6 damage is the most important part. Count Dooku is pretty good, right? Just KOs something out, has the shield counter. So at the very least, this also can be like a 3-for-1, right? Because you destroy a unit, you can attack a unit, attack another unit. So really, really powerful. We have our space units. Inferno Force is to clean turn 1 play, 2-3 stat lines, kind of whatever, right? You would rather have a 3-2 in space as a control deck because you want to answer things like A-Wing, or the 2-3 that Boba Fett plays. I forgot the name, but it's the 2-drop. But just, opting 2 twice, pretty good. The control deck lets you find your answer fairly quickly. We have Imperial Interceptor. I've been back and forth on these 2, which one I want to run 3 copies of. System Patrolcraft is pretty cool because most things in space are not breaking 4 on the threshold. So what that often means is that like this can often 2-for-1 something because your opponent will have to send 2 space units into it. However, with things like Open Fire, Tarkin Town, there's lots of ways that they can clear it, in which case I think I would rather prefer the Imperial Interceptor because it actually just guarantees that I'm knocking something out and then my opponent has to answer this. Whereas there's a potential for my opponent to answer this without me getting to, kill 2 space units. So I'm on 3 and 2, but maybe this flips based on meta or based on how I feel about it. We got 3 Ruthless Raiders. I just want to see this every single game. You know, if we draw multiples, you can just, you know, throw one in as a resource, but, you know, after it dies, getting to deal 4 damage in total to units in base with a 4/6 is pretty sweet. When we go into events here, we have Force Choke. Kind of weird, right? Because it's like technically card negative for you, but it's a control deck. I think you're kind of willing to sacrifice a little bit of card advantage there if it means that you get to control the board state well enough to get into your end game, right? We have Make an Opening. This is just really good into some of the lower ground decks, right? Or especially like the early like turn 1 plays. There's the ship that Boba Fett runs. That's I think it's like a 3/2 with shield, which is really good in every single other deck, but with Make an Opening, you can clear through the shield, right? You can clear Greedo into Sabine, you can clear some of the early units, or you can just give -2 before you attack into it, right? Remove its attacking value. So really good, right? They heal 2 back. Combos really well with Sabine, right? So you're gaining 3 back that turn. Like, awesome card. Open Fire is super clean, right? Like 4 is gonna clear a lot of good, like 3 drops, things like that, right? Like stuff you actually care about, you just have an immediate answer to. Along with Tarkin Town, you can reach all the way up to 7 with 1 card, like really powerful. I really like this card a lot. Power of the Dark Side, really get into decks that care a lot about leaders, right? So, or like stronger endgame units. It gets that reach through, and you know, if they have some kind of, you know, like shielded type effects, you know, gets through that. So, you know, in the right spot, this is super punishing, especially coming down at 3. Not always super useful. You kind of need to like manage the board state a little bit to get the max value out of this, and this is better in some matchups than others. But when this thing works, it is like game winning. So really, really strong card. Takedown, defeating any unit, which can include leaders that have 5 or less HP. Super powerful, right? Like you can answer Sabine when it comes down. You can answer a few other leaders when they come down. It also is just, you know, it can knock anything else out, right? So it doesn't have to be a leader. So super versatile card, very powerful. When we go into the sideboard, we have a few things, right? We kind of got to think about, you know, how are we beating like our aggro matchups better? You know, how are we improving our mid-range matchup and our control matchup? I haven't really solidified on the sideboard, but there are a few things I think are crucial, right? Bombing Run. Bombing Run lets you deal 3 into any zone. So any arena, ground or space. Super pivotal against aggro, right? If you're playing against Sabine, the problem is that like Sabine can decide to play on one side of the board or the other. So if you just get unlucky and you only have ground units, she can play for space, and then she can push past all of your, you know, board control, things like that. And so just having a thing that can just wipe through one side of the table is really, really important, in my opinion. Also because she curves out so aggressively, like she dumps her hand pretty quickly. You can potentially like 2 for 1 or 3 for 1 with 1 card, and into aggro, when you're able to get that kind of card advantage swing, normally the aggro deck has trouble rebuilding from that point, unless if they're running specific end game cards that rebuild really quickly. So, you know, if we're talking about like Magic, it'd be things like Collect a Company, and in this game we have U-Wing Reinforcements, which is essentially Collect a Company but better. So they have the ability to rebuild, but if they don't have that kind of effect immediately, then they get set too far back from something like Bombing Run. We have Vanquish for more grindy matchups. This defeats any non-leader unit, so none of this stuff where it has like a threshold, right? Like Takedown, you know, this can answer any unit, right? So, you know, we'll skip past to Avenger. If they play Avenger, you can play Vanquish on it, right? So really good into like those grindier matchups where they have the top end units that you need to take out. We have Super Laser Blast. This one is kind of interesting. So I'm trying this out specifically for like the grindy mid-range matchups like Boba Fett, right? Like when they play Vader on 7 and they build out their board, this lets you answer on the next turn when you claim initiative. Not exactly sure how strong this is. Defeating all units though is pretty powerful. The only problem with it is that if you have like a decent board state at that point, it becomes a little bit difficult to know when to pull the trigger on this. The consideration would be maybe just running another Palpatine, another Count Dooku in this slot, or potentially like a 3rd System Craft Patrol. This is a maybe, not exactly sold on this. So if you're someone who wants to play this deck on a budget, this is great news. You get to cut 2 legendaries out of the deck. This one feels incredibly important though. So at the very least, if you're someone who wants to try this out on a budget, you know, I mean, these are all sideboard cards, right? The actual main deck doesn't have any legendaries, which is pretty cool, right? So really affordable deck that's also extremely powerful. if you want a sideboard, I think Avenger is definitely like a staple. This is so good into grinding matchups and into control matchups. I think into control, the way you kind of want to play this, especially with things like Count Dooku, Emperor Palpatine, you want to be the second person to play it. If you're the first person to play Avenger and your control opponent and the mirror responds with an Avenger, I think you lose, right? Like imagine if you play an Avenger to make your opponent sack their Avenger, right? So you kind of want to build a board state out in the late game where they have to act first, and then that gets you more equity, right? Unless, if, of course, you have like enough of a board that you can, prevent something like that kind of blowout from happening, right? Or like Power of the Dark Side, right? Like imagine you play Avenger, your opponent plays Power of the Dark Side, like you've just lost, right? In the mirror, I would try to, be the second person to get to play these like responsive, reactive type cards. So strong, right? On play, on attack, they have to sack something. Like if they don't have an immediate, kill spell for this, like you are gonna win the game. If you have the life total to attack a few times with it, right? And 8 is a crazy stat line. That's our sideboard, right? We have some like mid-range control tech, right? With these, we have some aggro tech. Our deck is already pretty, propositioned to beat aggro. So bombing run is like, gonna get swapped out for probably like your, maybe your top end units like a Count Dooku and some Emperor Palpatines. And, for these, you can probably swap out some of your early, bolt type cards, right? So like your Death Star Stormtrooper. But if that kind of gives you an idea of how the sideboarding goes. Oh, also if you're going to play in the control, you cut like you can cut like make an opening, right? So if you cut that, your Death Star Stormtroopers and like a wolf, then you have your slots right here. It's kind of interesting because I can't really give too many tips and tricks on how to play it. Just try to be smart with how you're managing the board. If you played something like Hearthstone, then I think you're going to be naturally inclined to know how to do that. So it's kind of hard for me to like explain exactly. But I've noticed that the more I play this, the more I learn. And sometimes I learn things in game 1 that I carry into game 2 and game 3. So both times I went to my local tournaments, I played a deck in the finals where I lost game 1 and I learned something important and I carried that information and then I won games 2 and 3. Specifically, both of those times there were decks where the leader was more of a win condition, but the leader also was pretty hard to like kill through combat damage. So it made me play differently to prioritize like clearing their board. So Power of the Dark Side would answer their leader, or specifically I was playing against, I think it was Sharut. I had Power of the Dark Side, but also I made sure I always held up takedown for it. And then, it just became a lot easier. So you kind of learn on the fly. It's very experiential. And even if you have played some of these other card games, I think there's still stuff to relearn, right? Especially with the shared action system. You'll learn like how to kind of manage like when you actually want to make a play to give your opponent initiative so that they have to play something first and you answer it, versus like they have something that you want to answer immediately. So you pass on a game action to take initiative just so you can answer like a unit before they can attack or do another action, things like that. So there's nothing I can really, I think, impart in one video, but I think I would just encourage you, if you are playing this deck, to kind of like think a little bit after every single game about like, did I make a mistake, right? Like, did I use my open fire correctly? Was there something that I ignored on the table for too long that I should have answered sooner? Was there something I answered immediately that I didn't need to? Did I mismanage what I put into my, my resources? Did I need to play a more efficient curve, or could I take a few like inefficient turns to get to like a top end curve, or to play more early game units, things like that. It's a very adaptive game. I really enjoy it. I think it's pretty complex, but not too complex. I think it's like inaccessible for people. I think this is a pretty easy game to pick up and play, but I think that it does reward some pretty tight decision making. So hopefully this deck tech gives you something to try out. I don't think this list is solved by any means. Like the Super Laser Blast, I think is like on the chopping block until I can find something I think is better. But I still think it's kind of interesting. There's still more to experiment, but at the same time, like the card pool is kind of small. So there's only so much innovation we can do. So give it a shot. Let me know what you think, how your experience is playing the deck, what you think good and bad matchups are, because I'm still learning it myself. But until next time, thank you for watching.